In this video, we will give a brief walkthrough of the Qlik Sense extension MPM, which stands for Merverk Process Mining. My name is Per Malmlöv, and I'm the co-founder of Drake Analytics. We are a BI and AI consulting firm, partnered with Qlik, and the only Swedish MPM partner. So what is process mining? Process mining is about visualizing and analyzing processes based on digital traces, sometimes called event logs. A process has, as we all know, a starting point and an end point. And between this starting point and end point, a lot of things might have happened. And we call these things activities, and we represent them with round circles. Now, let's say that we are looking on, for example, a purchasing process, and we have maybe hundreds or thousands of purchasing orders in this process. Every time we execute a new instance of this process, we might, of course, take a new route in this process. Maybe sometimes we go backwards in the process. Perhaps we do deviations from the process path that we once set up as our intended way of working. Process mining is about taking the digital traces in our IT systems and make sense of all of this. We do this in order to understand how our processes really look like, so we can drive efficiencies and increase throughput. We also get the chance to measure and analyze compliance and conformance, and we can analyze and measure and understand bottlenecks, deviations, make them visible. Process mining is also a great starting point for driving automation, and we will take a deeper look at that in a live demo shortly. So before we dig down into the live demo, what are the benefits of doing process mining directly in Qlik Sense? Well, as most of you probably know, Qlik has a unique associative engine which makes us able to twist and turn data in a very intuitive and interactive way. And when we combine this with process mining, we get a great process transparency, which is very hard to beat in any other process mining product on the market. We can find root causes and deviations. We can integrate measures and KPIs seamlessly into our process analysis. And if you are an existing Qlik customer already, you can reuse all your data models and be up and running with process mining in just a few hours. So how does traditional process mapping connect to process mining? Well, first of all, traditional process mining is slow. It's disconnected from our IT systems, and it's also quite often expensive because it's interview-based. This doesn't mean that we should stop doing traditional process mapping. Traditional process mapping is a good tool in our toolbox for process improvement. However, process mining is a bridge between model and reality, and it's a bridge between process and data, and also between business and IT. This is a Qlik Sense application for analyzing a purchasing process. We can see that we have roughly 135,000 purchase order items and 7,000 variants of this purchasing process. This means that we have done this purchasing process, or we have run or executed this process in around 7,000 different ways. We have a total purchasing volume of around $3 billion. We have a cash discount loss on $57 million. We have an average net lead time of around 32 days, and we have an automation rate on around 9%. Both the automation rate, the average net lead time, the number of process variants, as well as the number of cases or PO items. This is KPIs that we get automatically from MPM when we read in the event log into MPM. On the right-hand side on the screen, we see the process analyzer object of MPM. Right now, we are looking at the 10 most common process variants out of around 7,000. We can see that these 10 most common variants cover around 75% of our cases. We can easily start out, for example, by saying, let's look at the most common variant that we have for our purchasing process. I click in the menu on the left-hand side. We can see that the most common process in this purchasing process is going from purchase order issued to vendor creates invoice, to record good received, to record invoice received, down to clear invoice. This variant covers around 27% of our cases. We can easily add more cases and say, okay, how does our second most common variant look like? we get a green indication showing that the second most common variant of this process takes a path from create purchase order item directly down to record goods received, and then back to vendor creates invoice, and then continues down to record invoice received. We can add a third variant and look at the top 3 variants, and we can continue in this manner. We can go all the way and say, show me, for example, the most common 1,000 variants of our purchasing process. And what will happen now is that Qlik Sense will load for a while because it will render 1,000 process variants directly in our chart. But what we will see here in just a few seconds is how things usually look in real life. We do things in a lot of different ways. We get this spaghetti behavior, and we can see that perhaps we are not as compliant or consistent as we thought that we were initially. We can look at this from a couple of different angles. Of course, we can see that we are doing things in a lot of different ways, and that's usually the case out there. If we have very strict compliance requirements on our organization, of course, then we have a lot of things to work on. On the other hand, if we look at the top 10 process variants, for example, we can see that we cover 75%, and that's probably good enough for starting an improvement project in the business. In the process, we have activities, round circles, and arches. Arches are connecting the activities together. As we see, we have a set of KPIs directly in this process mining object. Here we see frequency directly on the activity. Right now we have lead time on the arches. All these KPIs are free to define. It could be lead time, frequency, money, it could be OEE factors for production, or only imagination sets the limit. If I click on a single activity, I get a set of KPIs. Also, these KPIs can be tailor-made, as well as if I click on an arch, I can also tailor-made these activities. I can easily change a KPI on an arch or on a node by using the menu on the left hand side, for example switching the arc KPIs to frequency like this. A thick line in MPM indicates a higher value on the selected KPI. We can see that from vendor creates invoice down to record invoice receipt, we have around 40,000 PO items. That renders in a slightly thicker line than, for example, this flow from record invoice receipt, where we have 7,000 PO items going back in the process up to recorded goods receipt. I will now switch back to average median idle time in this chart, and let's do some analysis to see how we can really use this. MPM works with all standard functionality in Qlik Sense. And of course, MPM updates as we expect it to do with all and interacts with all other objects in Qlik. This chart on the lower part of the screen shows lead time on the x-axis and number of PO items on the y-axis. If I now, for example, want to dig down in lead times larger than 35 days and up, I can simply select in the chart, and of course all objects, KPI objects, as well as the process chart will update. Let's say that we are especially interested in the step from remove payment block down to clear invoice. You see that this is quite time consuming. So I will simply select the arc on remove payment block, and I will do a selection with this edge or with this arc. So now I'm doing a selection directly in the process, and I'm limiting my selection of process variants. I'm only selecting the process variants that went from remove payment block down to clear invoice. Of course, the process itself will update, as well as all other KPIs and objects on my screen. We're still looking at the 10 most common variants, and we see that this covers around 78% of the total cases. With this selection, we can do as we are used to in Qlik. We can take this selection and view it from different perspectives with other charts, for example. If I scroll down, in this case, I have a chart showing supplier on the x-axis and number of PO items on the y-axis. And we can see that the supplier Bao for Mat is the supplier that really stands out, where we have spent a lot of time, we have a high lead time, and we have passed the remove payment block a lot of times. I can simply select the Bao for Mat supplier like this, and then I can do as always in Qlik, I can use this selection and continue and enhance my analysis. Perhaps I want to go straight down to the order lines and understand what kind of orders have for this supplier and try to do something about this behavior. Let's take a look at some more ways of analyzing and viewing our process. Let's clear our selection and let's jump to the comparison view. MPM works out of the box with all standard functionality in Qlik Sense. One great feature in Qlik Sense, and also that works perfectly with MPM is alternate states. Alternate states makes it possible for us to compare two objects with two selections side by side. In this instance, we have a process object to the left and a process object to the right. For example, in this data set, we have two subsidiaries, two companies, and we can now, for example, put the EU company to the left and put the US company to the right. We quickly see that the vast majority of the PO items is made within the GU company. We have 134,000 POs roughly. We also see that the automation rate is vastly higher within the EU than for the US company. We also see that we have, of course, a lot more variants. These two selections works perfectly fine if we want to continue and dig down for some standard purchasing KPIs or whatever we want to do in terms of analysis. Some more great features in MPM is the possibility to search in patterns, and we can do that with something called process pattern analysis. Within purchasing, we have something called a maverick buy, and that's when we buy something from a vendor, we get the invoice in our hand, but we realize that, oh, we have forgotten to create a PO for this purchase. And that's, of course, a deviation to our purchasing process. That's just one example of a pattern that we might want to find in some process within our organization. What we can do here is that we can build up a query and search for a pattern within our process. We see now that we are looking at 134,000 POs, so we have cleared our selection. We will do that now. And we have our 7,000 variants. Let's now build a pattern here. So we draw a wildcard out saying we will search for anything or nothing. We will then search for that the supplier creates an invoice. We will drag that out and put that after the wildcard. We will then put another wildcard out, meaning nothing or anything might have happened, and we will search for the activity that we as a customer create a purchase order item, and then we will finalize with a wildcard again. So this means basically that vendor creates invoice happens first, create purchase order item happens afterwards, and in between anything can happen. Let's apply this question. So MPM will now search for this pattern for us in our process data, and we can directly see that we have 2,000 cases of Maverick buys roughly, and in 342 different ways has this happen. And this is the way that the 10 most common process variants where we have done Maverick buy within our organization. So this is of course very interesting, and these kind of selections is quite hard to make without this kind of technology. And we can of course take this selection and we look on our chart that we looked at just before. We can see that the supplier Lego GmbH is the one that has where we have done most Maverick buys. And of course we can select the supplier. We can look at who is the purchaser, what articles have we bought, anything that might help us to prevent this in the future. Okay, great. Let's have a look at some more examples. We will clear our selections and let's jump to the tab Conformance Checking. A great thing with MPM and process mining is that we can measure conformance and compliance. In this tab, we see directly here that we have 70% compliance on average for this data set, for these 135,000 PO items. In the process mining object to the right, we can see that we have a golden line going through the entire process object. This indicates our happy path. This is our desired path, and we can configure this freely how we want to have this happy path for our project, for our process. All gray or green lines that goes outside the happy path is by definition deviations in our process. And we can see directly just by looking at this chart that the remove payment block step is a very large deviation. We can see that just by our own eyes. But the beauty here is that we can continue and do selections on pretty much anything. We can go back and have a look, for example, at the US company as we selected before. And we can see that the US company has 47% compliance. And we also see that the US company has never done records goods received. So we get a red markup here in the chart because we have never passed this step for this part of the data. So we get a lot of information just by by looking at this chart, but we can also build up tables and charts like we see here, where we have put compliance and put supplier on the x-axis, for example. We can also create charts where we measure compliance over time. In this chart now we are still looking at the US company, for example. So we have a lot of ways of twisting and turning our data in order to understand how compliant we are and track what's making us compliant or not making us compliant. This was a quick introduction to process mining directly in Qlik Sense with MPM. With MPM, we can analyze any process at all, and there is a lot of more in terms of features and functionality to dig into. One example is value stream mapping, which enables us to analyze and find bottlenecks in our production processes with the help of MPM. Also, the all-new execution module. For more information about process mining and MPM, please visit our website or send me an email.